When you finally stop reacting to the chaos, when you let silence speak louder than every accusation, something extraordinary happens. The power they once held over you begins to dissolve. You realize that freedom doesn't come from fighting harder, it comes from times no longer needing to fight at all. Asterisk. Refusing to play the emotional game begins with recognizing that what's happening in front of you isn't an honest interaction, it's a performance. The histrionic personality constructs a world built on exaggeration, emotional volatility, and manipulation through attention. They thrive on intensity, not intimacy. Every exchange becomes a stage, and you, unknowingly, are drafted into their play. They provoke reactions because reactions validate their existence. The moment you feel compelled to explain, to defend, or to soothe, you've stepped into the script they've written for you. That's the first mistake most people make. They assume good intentions can fix chaos. But the histrionic doesn't seek resolution, they seek engagement. They don't want peace, they want the performance to continue. You have to understand the psychology behind this dynamic. A histrionic individual fears invisibility more than rejection. They need emotional attention the way a drowning person needs air. Every gesture, every story, every tear or outburst is calibrated, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, to pull you back into the emotional loop. And they do it by making you feel responsible. Responsible for their moods, for their feelings, for their validation. You'll hear things like, "You don't care about me, you've changed," or "I guess I just don't matter to you anymore." These aren't statements of truth, they're traps. They're designed to test your empathy, to guilt you back into the game. And the more you respond, the tighter the net becomes. Refusing to play means standing at the edge of that emotional arena and deciding, consciously, not times to enter. You have to resist the instinct to fix what's being broken on purpose. The histrionic needs you to feel confused and off balance, because when you're off balance, you're easier to control. They want to keep you explaining yourself, defending your integrity, chasing the next moment of calm. And every time you try to reason with them, you're reinforcing the illusion that the performance is real. It's not. It's a mask of vulnerability, carefully constructed to keep your focus on them. When you stop playing, the mask slips. They'll panic, they'll accuse, they'll try to reel you back in, but that's proof that you're doing something right. Refusing to play isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It means you've decided that your peace of mind, your stability, your sense of self are no longer negotiable. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault, and you start observing instead of reacting. Observation is powerful. It's detachment with awareness. You see the manipulation, the emotional bait, and you let it pass. You don't feed it energy. That's what breaks the cycle. Not confrontation, not justification, but stillness. The histrionic can't operate in stillness because there's no energy to draw from. The drama collapses when there's no audience. To get there, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Part of why you stayed in the performance is because it gave you something: purpose, validation, a sense of being needed. That's the hook. Refusing to play also means confronting your own emotional dependency, your own need to rescue, to be the hero or the caretaker. It means admitting that you've been complicit in sustaining the cycle, not out of malice, but out of misplaced empathy. And that's hard to face, but until you do, you'll always be vulnerable to manipulation disguised as emotion. Refusing to play is a form of self-respect. It's choosing truth over drama, restraint over reaction, integrity over chaos. It's understanding that you can't control someone else's narrative, only your participation in it. It's learning to let silence speak louder than explanations. It's a quiet, powerful declaration that your energy is sacred, that your attention must be earned by honesty, not demanded through theatrics. And once you internalize that truth, the emotional hooks begin to lose their hold. The performance continues, perhaps louder for a while, but you're no longer in the front row. You're standing outside the theater, finally able to see the show for what it always was: a desperate attempt to be seen, not an invitation to connect. Withdrawing your reactions is one of the most powerful acts of psychological resistance you can practice, and yet it feels almost unnatural at first. When someone is being dramatic, accusatory, or manipulative, your instinct is to respond. You want to defend yourself, to clarify the truth, to make them understand. But that instinct is precisely what keeps you trapped. The histrionic personality doesn't want understanding. They want engagement. They want to feel the pulse of your attention, the emotional energy that flows every time you react. When you raise your voice, when you try to reason, when you plead or argue, they feel alive. Your reactions become their fuel. So the only way to break the cycle is to stop feeding it. Withdrawing your reactions doesn't mean becoming cold or cruel. It means refusing to offer the emotional energy that keeps the dynamic alive. It means observing instead of absorbing. When the histrionic throws out a provocation, a sigh, a sharp tone, a sudden display of tears, you stay grounded. You breathe before you speak. You notice your own impulse to respond and choose not to. You don't need to defend yourself against distortions because you know who you are. You don't need to chase fairness from someone who thrives on imbalance. The silence that follows your restraint can feel unbearable at first, almost guilt-inducing because they'll accuse you of being distant, unfeeling, or cruel. But that's the manipulation resurfacing again. It's a test to see if they still have access to your emotions. The withdrawal of reaction is not about punishing the other person. It's about reclaiming control over yourself. For too long, they've dictated the rhythm of your emotional life, when to feel guilty, when to feel anxious, when to feel relieved. They've trained you to dance to the tempo of their moods. By refusing to react, you disrupt that rhythm. You create space, mental and emotional space, where you can think clearly, where your sense of stability can grow. In that space, you begin to rediscover what calm feels like. You start to realize that peace is not dependent on their approval or their moods. It comes from your own discipline, your ability to stay composed even when chaos unfolds around you. The histrionic will notice your withdrawal immediately. They'll test you harder. They might amplify the theatrics, make scenes, cry louder, fabricate crises, anything to pull you back into engagement. And that's when you must hold your ground most firmly. You can acknowledge what's happening without reacting to it. You can say little or nothing. You can let their emotion rise and fall without becoming its mirror. This is how you take back power, not through confrontation, but through composure. Emotional neutrality feels like weakness in the beginning, but it's actually strength disguised as stillness. Every time you choose not to react, you're reinforcing your independence. You're retraining your nervous system to stay calm in the face of emotional turbulence. And slowly, the energy that once bound you to their chaos starts to dissipate. You begin to see that your silence isn't empty, it's full of control, presence, and quiet authority. Anchoring yourself in truth rather than emotion requires a shift in how you perceive reality itself. When you've been entangled with a histrionic personality, your emotional landscape becomes distorted. Their moods, their stories, their reactions, everything is exaggerated, charged with intensity, designed to pull you off center. Over time, you start to mistake emotional noise for meaning. You begin to question your own perceptions because they constantly rewrite the truth to suit the moment. One day you're loved, the next you're blamed, and somehow both are supposed to make sense. Anchoring yourself in truth is about stepping out of that emotional fog and learning to trust your own clarity again. It's about choosing reality over the roller coaster of reactive emotion. Truth is not negotiable, even when emotion insists that it should be. A histrionic will often try to redefine truth in the heat of the moment. They'll use tears, charm, or outrage to shift the narrative, to make you doubt what actually happened. They'll twist words, alter timelines, and accuse you of insensitivity when you point out inconsistencies. If you aren't grounded, you'll get swept away in their emotional logic, a place where feeling overrides fact. Anchoring yourself in truth means you no longer allow emotions, theirs or yours, to determine what's real. You observe, you recall, you verify. You learn to separate what happened from how someone feels about what happened. That's how you start reclaiming your sense of reality. To stay anchored, you have to build a quiet inner discipline. You pause before responding. You breathe before speaking. You remind yourself that the loudest emotion in the room is not necessarily the truest one. Truth is steady. It doesn't demand, it doesn't scream, it doesn't fluctuate with the tides of mood. It's there, beneath the chaos, waiting to be recognized. You begin to ask simple questions. What do I know to be true? What can I actually verify? What evidence do I have? And you trust that process more than any emotional persuasion. When you do that, the manipulation begins to lose its grip because the histrionic can no longer dictate your sense of what's real. Anchoring in truth also means accepting discomfort. The truth doesn't always feel good. It might reveal that someone you care about isn't capable of emotional honesty. It might show that you've been living in denial, hoping things would change that never will. It might expose your own role in enabling the dysfunction. But truth, even when painful, liberates. It creates a foundation that can't be shaken by someone else's outburst or charm. It gives you stability in a world built on performance. You begin to realize that emotions are weather, they pass, they change, they're transient. Truth is the ground beneath that weather. When you stand on it, you can face any storm without losing your footing. You stop reacting to every gust of emotion and start responding to what's actually there. That's where real strength begins, not in emotional control over others, but in unwavering commitment to what is real, no matter how much it challenges your comfort or your attachment. Valuing peace over validation is one of the hardest lessons to learn, because it asks you to let go of something deeply human, the need to be understood, to be seen, to be right. When you're dealing with someone whose emotional world revolves around performance, they will constantly pull you toward that need. They'll accuse you of not caring. They'll twist your words. They'll tell stories that make you look cruel or indifferent. Every part of you will want to defend yourself, to correct the record, to prove your good intentions. But that pursuit is a trap, because the moment you chase validation from someone who thrives on emotional control, you've already surrendered your peace. The more you seek to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, the more you lose your inner stillness. Peace isn't passive. It's not avoidance or apathy. It's an active decision to prioritize your stability over approval. It's the realization that you don't need everyone to agree with you, and you don't need to win every emotional argument. When you value peace, you begin to measure your strength not by how loudly you can assert yourself, but by how calmly you can stand your ground. You stop needing to convince anyone of your worth, because your worth isn't up for negotiation. This is where power quietly returns to you. You start to see that your inner calm is not weakness, it's clarity. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need to shout, because it's rooted in self-respect, not external validation. The histrionic personality thrives on the opposite of peace. They want emotional turbulence because turbulence guarantees attention. If things are calm, they feel irrelevant, and irrelevance terrifies them. So they'll create storms, accusations, crises, emotional highs and lows to drag you back into the cycle. They'll test your boundaries to see if you'll abandon your peace to re-enter their world. And that's where your discipline is tested. You'll feel the pull to explain, to fix, to comfort, to apologize for things you didn't do. But valuing peace means resisting that pull. It means letting go of the desire to manage someone else's emotions and focusing instead on mastering your own. You begin to understand that walking away from chaos doesn't make you heartless, it makes you free. Peace has a cost. It often means losing the illusion of closeness with someone who never really knew how to connect without conflict. It means tolerating their disapproval, enduring their attempts to guilt you, and standing firm in your choice to remain calm. It's a lonely process at first, because peace is quiet and validation is loud. But over time, you start to crave that quiet more than the noise. You realize that nothing they can say or do is worth sacrificing your mental clarity, your dignity, or your sense of balance. The storm can rage, but you don't have to step into it. You watch it from a distance, grounded in your decision that your peace is the highest form of strength, and that no amount of validation can replace the freedom that comes from choosing it. Reclaiming freedom through silence and self-mastery is the point where endurance transforms into strength. When you've spent enough time entangled in emotional chaos, silence feels unnatural. You've been conditioned to respond, to explain, to justify every word and action. You've been trained to fill every pause, because silence was always punished, interpreted as coldness, rejection, or defiance. But true silence isn't emptiness. It's power contained. It's the moment you stop being a participant in someone else's performance and start becoming the author of your own life. Self-mastery begins where reactivity ends. It's not about suppressing emotion but governing it, learning to hold it steady even when provoked. When you can be silent in the face of manipulation, you're no longer controlled by the need to be understood or the fear of being misrepresented. You become ungovernable in the best sense, calm, centered, and inwardly free. Freedom in this context isn't external, it's psychological. It's the freedom to choose your response instead of being dragged into reaction. The histrionic personality depends on your emotional predictability. They know that certain words or tones will spark guilt, anxiety, or defensiveness in you, and they exploit that predictability to reassert dominance. The moment you respond differently or not at all, the pattern breaks. Silence disarms manipulation because it deprives the manipulator of control. They can't steer a conversation when you don't bite the hook. They can't twist your words when you don't offer them. The stillness unsettles them because it mirrors back their own emptiness, their inability to draw power without an audience. That's what makes silence such an act of rebellion. It denies them access to the part of you they've always controlled. Self-mastery is what sustains that silence. Without inner control, silence becomes repression, and repression eventually erupts. But self-mastery transforms silence into presence. You learn to observe your impulses without acting on them. You feel the surge of emotion, the anger, the guilt, the sadness, and you breathe through it instead of expressing it impulsively. That discipline builds resilience. It teaches you that you don't have to meet chaos with chaos. You don't have to match their intensity to maintain your worth. You begin to recognize that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to move. The more you practice this stillness, the more you detach your identity from external reactions.